Okay, so I think we can get started. So we've got the president of UCL SJP, who's going to start off by giving a quick introduction, and then we'll hand it over to you. All right? So, yeah, you can just stand over there. I don't know. We're trying what we can.
Okay. Peace be upon you all. This event is a collab between Amnesty UCL and UCL SJP. And we are privileged to have with us someone who is a distinguished guest for us, and he's none other than Dr. Salman Abu-Sittah, whose credentials precede him as a defender of Palestinian rights, and in particular the right of return, which is very critical and particularly important in this day and age. Beyond this right existing within the theoretical kind of paradigm alone, Dr. Abu-Sittah has worked to see it actually actualized. And one of the ways in which he has done this is by mapping out on a series of atlases Palestine pre the Nakba. Dr. Abu-Sittah himself has led a very interesting life. He was himself affected by the Nakba, the tragedy of the Nakba, and this is a topic in which he is an expert. And he himself actually studied and received his PhD from this university, UCL, some years ago. And he is here with us today to talk about the poignant and important issue of human rights and apartheid as relates to Israel-Palestine. So we are very privileged to have you with us, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. I was at UCL, and I have very happy memories, and not only happy memories, but very hard work. I used to leave here 11 p.m. to catch the last train to go home. I did my PhD in engineering at UCL, and it helped me a great deal in what we are talking about today and the plan for the right of return. This education helped me to formalize and develop this plan. Nice to be with you for many reasons. You are young people, you have future, and therefore you have a hand in the destiny of the world, however small it is. And therefore, you have a duty to work for justice, because justice is the right of everyone. And if one is deprived from justice, then we're all deprived from justice. I have just come from a 3-week visit to Gaza. I have not been there for a good part of 40 years, since I became a refugee, actually longer than that. And it is an experience which is worth mentioning, even though I have been following the news there all the time. What is Gaza Strip? What is its relationship to Palestine, or the justice in Palestine, or the future of Palestine? Gaza Strip is a new name invented after 1948. It's only 12 kilometers wide by 30 kilometers long, and it represents 1.3% of Palestine's area. It's very crowded, and the density of population there is 7,000 per square kilometers. And why is it crowded? Nobody tells us, at least in the West, they don't tell you why is it crowded. It is crowded because the people in Gaza lived in 240 villages in 1948, and their land area is the southern half of Palestine. So they lived in 50% of Palestine. And now they are living in 1.3% of Palestine. Why is that? Did they migrate out of fun? No. They were the subject of the most horrendous ethnic cleansing operation in modern history. The settlers from Poland and Russia came to Palestine in smuggler ships during the British Mandate and attacked them, attacked also all Palestine, but now we're talking about Gaza, attacked them in April, in October, actually from early 1948 till about October 1948. And they attacked them and expelled them from their homes, and they crowded them in this 1% of Palestine. Of course, that couldn't have happened voluntarily. There has been a number of massacres taking place, like in Abu Shusha and in Ramla and many other places. We have documented those in our website, Palestine Land Society, which, by the way, I formed in London 21 years ago, Palestine Land Society. You'll find much of what I'm talking to you about is on this website. All right, so they were driven to this place, and now they are surrounded by barbed wire and by a fence several meters high above and below ground, and they are monitored by air, sea, and land all the time. Access to Gaza Strip in and out is very much controlled. They have limited supplies of medicine and other basic supplies. But this is not only that. When I was there, I was frequently awakened at night by the hum of drones. Drones, Israeli drones over Gaza. Day and night, these drones are watching, monitoring every movement, monitoring every place. They are ready to direct attacks against the Gaza Strip anytime. And when I was there also, there were sorties of F-16s flying over Gaza, and people told me they are going to attack us now, they are going to attack us. And so they evacuated their offices on that day so that they may be not hit. And they are hit regularly. There has been 4 big attacks in the last 6 years. If you are a 6-year-old child, you would have seen 4 years in your life. You don't know what peace means. And when they hit, they have complete control of the Gaza Strip. They know every name, every person, his telephone number, where he lives, what he moves, and so on. They monitor them, and they actually bombed buildings, as you probably have seen in the news. When I was walking around, I saw some buildings, high-rise buildings, maybe 10 or more story high. They disappeared from sight. It was almost like looking at a toothless mouth. One building there, 2 are missing. And you see rubble there, piles of rubble in the empty space. And the precision by which they can select and kill at will, the Israelis that is so dramatic. They can actually hit one apartment in a building because they want to kill someone there. They actually hit one apartment. Sometimes they hit one window. And what they do is they call the person. They say, we are going to kill you in 10 minutes. Leave or you'll die. Because they have their number and they can watch them. And they actually call them to tell them, if you don't evacuate your house in 10 minutes, it will be destroyed and you are in it. They do that. Imagine, just like this is not a war, of course. This is the most ugly form of aggression. For example, if you have an aquarium in your house and you have some fishes in it, and you decide to kill or pick one fish, you can do that at will. It's not a war. A war is between 2 equal parties. So this situation is in the eye of the world, but you are not allowed to see it. This is another crime. As you know, from Statute of Rome, to commit a crime, war crime, you are punishable by that. But now the Statute of Rome in 1998, just before 2000, states that the criminal is not the one who shoots only, the one who gave the order, the one who politically motivated that order, the country which elected the people who committed the murder. It also says that people who aid and abet the murderer are also war criminals. And that applies to many Western countries, which actually aided and abetted that. So aiding and abetting is a war crime. You can check it out in the Statute of Rome. So going back to Gaza, Gaza is just an example of what happened to whole of Palestine. What did happen to Palestine in 1948? Let us go back a little bit in the First World War. Palestine, like any other part of the Arab world, in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, and so on, was part of the Arab world, which was part of a larger Islamic world. And it has its capital changing from Mecca to Damascus to Baghdad, and then to Istanbul during the Ottoman Empire. So the Western powers, British and French, attacked these areas in 1917. And as a result, they took over Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon, and Egypt. Egypt has been taken over by the British earlier in 1882. But the Arab East, which is the Eastern Mediterranean area, has been occupied by Britain and France in 1917 to 1918. So what happened then? The British issued Balfour Declaration on 2nd of November, 1917, saying that the terminology is in your text. They look with favor upon the establishment of a national home for Jews in Palestine without prejudice to the population of the country. You look at these words, they are full of criminal intent. First of all, they are saying establishment of a home, not a state. And they are saying in Palestine, not of Palestine. And they are saying that these people are not already in Palestine. We will import them later on from Europe, so they are not there. And the other people mentioned, they said other non-Jews. Who are the non-Jews? Who are the non-Jews? There are 95% of population who are Arab Palestinians. They are both Christian and Muslims. They are the absolute majority of the country. And you say the other non-Jews. Just, I cannot give you examples about how atrocious this. So this is obviously against principles of justice. It's a criminal act. More so, it's a betrayal of the promise given by the British, saying to the Arabs in the whole region that if we defeat the Ottomans or Turks, you will be free. And they applied that to some degree to Iraq, to Egypt was there already, and the French took over Syria and Lebanon. And so Palestine was considered to be what's called Mandate Class A. Class A means the country is ready for independence, and the job of the caretaker, namely the Britain, is to help this country and build its institutions so that it will have an independent government, free government. They did that in Iraq, but they did not do so in Palestine, because Balfour conspired 6 months or many months earlier with the rich European Jews, saying that we will let you in Palestine when we occupy it. So that was a clear case of betrayal. At the time when that promise was made, there was, as I said, about 5 to 6% of the country Jews who were not European mostly. They were what we call Arab Jews there. They are citizens of the various countries in the Arab world who happen to be Jews. They did not have any aspirations to kill their neighbors and to take over their country. Those who had these aspirations are people who were brought in from Poland and Russia and various parts of Europe. So the Palestinians were surprised that Britain, which was supposed to give them independence, they were planning to bring people from outside to take over their country. And they resisted that in terms of riots and uprising and so on. The biggest uprising was in 1936. In 1936, by this time, the British allowed large number of Jews from Europe to the percentage of 30% of population. So they revolted against that, and they fought the British in Palestine, asking for simple things. We want to be free of our country. We want to have an independent Palestinian government. We don't want our country to be taken over by European settlers. And this revolt lasted 3 years, from 1936 to 1939. During that time, the British Army brutally quelled the revolt. I say brutally. They instituted the new action of bombing villages by air. People did not actually see planes before. So they bombed villages, destroyed them. They destroyed many houses. They took people of a village hostage, put them in cages for 2-3 days without food or drink, forcing them to tell if they have arms. Anyone who has any pistol or gun would probably face a life sentence. Sometimes they were executed, and their leaders were detained or executed. 100 leaders were executed by the British. Others were deported. They applied fines against villages more than their annual income for a year. They have to pay fines. Why is that? The Britain came just to give them freedom, and now they are doing the opposite. And during this time, they trained these new settlers in night squads called SNS, Special Night Squads, so that they can attack Palestinians later on. They gave them arms, training, or Wingate is known to train settlers in an army. They formed, the British formed, allowed the formation of the Haganah, the forerunners of the Israeli army. So by 1939, the Palestinian society is decimated completely and defenseless. So I call this 1939 in my writings all the time, I call it the British inflicted Nakba. So what happens after that? Palestine became an easy prey for the Zionists. Their army became stronger, and they were ready to bounce on Palestine. And in 1942, Ben Gurion declared to Zionist conference in Baltimore, United States, in 1942, saying we will make Palestine British Commonwealth. But they were waiting, preparing for that day during the Second World War. And by the end of the Second World War in 1945, the Zionists, who now have an army of 120,000 soldiers, organized in 9 brigades, they are ready to bounce in Palestine. What's the problem? The problem is that the British are still there, having the theoretical duty of protecting Palestine. So they attacked the British forces in Palestine. The Zionists attacked the British forces in Palestine. Their erstwhile benefactors, they attacked them because they don't need them. They hanged British soldiers in trees. They kidnapped judges. They blew up their headquarters in Jerusalem. This is to let the Britain leave Palestine, and then they take it over because Palestinians now are no more of a threat in any way. And this is what happened. The British has an unceremonious departure of Palestine in 1948. They left in a hurry. They left Palestine in the hands of the settlers whom they trained. And I wrote recently that their unceremonious departure, the British unceremonious departure from Palestine, looks like the American escape from Afghanistan a few weeks ago. They left in the middle of the night, leaving the country in the hands of settlers. Unlike the time when the British left India or Cyprus, they left in an orderly manner. They handed over the government to the people of the country. No, they did not do that. They handed it over to, they left it in the hands of people whom they trained, who came from Europe. So then the Israelis occupied Palestine. I say the invasion of the Zionist invasion of Palestine is not in the middle of 1948. It's much earlier. Let me just go back one step. In 1947, Britain threw the problem of Palestine in the hands of the United Nations. So the United Nations said, let us divide the country, but they have no right to divide the country. As you will know, the United Nations have no jurisdiction to divide countries between various people. But they wanted to suggest, since the Jews now are in large numbers, they said, let us suggest dividing the country between the two parties. And this is absolutely a Western imperialist plan, because the people of the country never wanted to divide their country. And then the plan, which was approved by the Western colonial powers and United Nations, the plan gave half, more than half, 55% of the country to the new settlers who just arrived in smuggler ships in the middle of the night. And the people of the country were left with less than half. And by the way, the partition plan never envisaged that anybody will be displaced from their homes. But this was, of course, totally unaccepted. Very quickly, almost 6 months later, in the middle of March 1948, the United Nations realized that their suggestion, their proposal is unworkable. And I quote, without much bloodshed, cannot be applied without much bloodshed. So the United Nations dropped the plan, and so did the United States with them. They dropped the plan. There is no more partition plan, is unworkable. And they suggested instead that the United Nations replace United Kingdom in having a trusteeship over Palestine till they find a way. When that happened in the middle of March 1948, Ben-Gurion was furious. He was mad. He was hoping that the partition plan, which has no legal validity, will be his thread of legality to jump over Palestine. So he decided to ignore the partition plan, and they started the Zionist occupation of Palestine in April 1948. Nobody tells you that. Nobody tells you that. They talk about May, but the Zionist invasion started in Palestine actually earlier than April, but officially started in April 1948. Now, what happened at that time? As I said, 120,000 soldiers in 9 brigades, they undertook 31 military operations. All details are found in my Atlas of Palestine, 1917 to 1966, and they attacked Palestine. In this period, they attacked 220 villages and the main cities in Palestine, Jaffa, Haifa, Safad, Tiberias, and so on. They attacked them and depopulated the people in their, from their homes in these towns and villages. And the population expelled at that time represents half of the total Palestinian refugees today. So half of the total Palestinian refugees were expelled while the British were watching, just running quickly to the nearest airport or port to run away from Palestine. And that was before something called State of Israel was declared. It was declared in May 1948, and before any Arab soldier entered to help Palestine. Now, therefore, Israel was not in state of defense, self-defense. Israel was attacking a country to take it over. And this taking over, as I said, could not have happened without massacres. We record 156 atrocities and massacres in this period. Then, in 14th of May, Ben Gurion announced to his fellow settlers the formation of the State of Israel. And on that day, on that very day, almost the same afternoon, I became a refugee. How did that happen? In our area, which is southern Palestine, and I'm born in Al-Ma'in, which is part of Beersheba district. And that day, 14th of May, we were attacked by 24 armored vehicles. I was 10 years old then, and we saw them attacking us in the middle of the night. We have no way to fight them. We have only about 10 or 15 young men with old rifles. They tried to fight back, and they kept them at bay for a little bit. But in the morning, they took over our land, and they destroyed our homes. They destroyed a school, which my father built in 1920. They burnt our homes, and they destroyed everything in sight, including the so-called Bayara well, which we had. So on the day Ben Gurion declared his state, I became a refugee. Now, for in the following 6 months, Israel took over not only what the partition plan has suggested, 55%, they took 78% of Palestine. As you well know, in 1967, they took over the remaining part and also parts of Lebanon and Syria and Egypt. Now, in this operation, when Israel took over 78%, I challenge anyone to tell me if there is 1 kilometer Israel took from Palestine by anything except by brute force. Not 1 kilometer is taken from Palestine by any legal means. Even today, Israel has no borders. It does not declare itself to have any borders. And the line, which is called Green Line wrongly, it is actually the armistice line, at which line the forces stopped in 1949. And the second article of the Armistice Agreement signed by the United Nations as well as a witness says that this armistice line, or so-called green line, has no legal validity. It does not grant anybody any rights or deprive anybody from any rights. So Israel at the moment has no borders, neither legal, I mean, by its own admission, or also by the international law. So what happened after that is that a total of 560,000 villages have been depopulated from all over Palestine. And they are the refugees today. Refugees today are 8 million people, 8 million people. When you read the figures of UNRWA, they mention 5.5 or 6. That is because this is the figure registered with the UNRWA. But the total number of people who are not registered and registered is 8 million. What do they ask for? A simple thing. They ask for return to their homes. And the United Nations have, in 11 December, almost a week ago, anniversary, 11 December 1949, issued a resolution called 194. Paragraph 11 of that resolution says the refugees should go back to their homes. And it also says that they should be given care and relief until this happens. And it also says there is a mechanism called United Nations Conciliation Commission of Palestine to organize their return to their homes. This resolution is to Palestinians sacred because it embodies their basic right. It is also legal because it has been affirmed by the United Nations constantly for 73 years. Every year it is affirmed. And also it is not a new invention. It is not a grant by the United Nations. It is affirmation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was passed by the United Nations one day before Resolution 194. On 10th of December 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was passed by the nations. Article 13 of it says nobody should be expelled from their home, and if they are out, they should be allowed to return. The second day, on 11 December, Resolution 194 is passed to allow the Palestinians to return. And it is the longest standing resolution in the history of the United Nations. It has been affirmed every year, more than once actually every year. At the moment, 135 times this resolution was passed by the United Nations. Therefore, if there is only one resolution to be followed, adopted, affirmed by the United Nations, it will be this Resolution 194. Now, Israel refused to abide by this resolution, and it took over this area of Palestine, as I said, without one single kilometer by any legal means, agreed means. And not only that, the Western powers, which created that, actually forbade Arabs to recover or roll back this occupation. In 1951, the United Kingdom and United States, and I think France, warned the Arabs against any attempt to make the Israelis roll back their occupation and return the people. And this continued, of course. In 1956, France, Israel Britain attacked Egypt in 1956, as you know, and then 1967. We know now that it was planned, war of 1967 planned 3 years before that, took over the rest of Palestine in what's now called the West Bank, which is the eastern part of Palestine, and Gaza Strip, which I'm talking about, and took also all Sinai and Golan Heights of Syria. So the settler colonialism project is not only initiated a long time ago, but is maintained by the Western colonial powers today. As you will know from the work of scholars in settler colonial projects, it is a project intended to do two things. Number one, to take over completely the territory, and second, to eliminate the people of the land. I say eliminate, not only to make them marginal, but to eliminate them completely, to make them absent. And this is actually the origin of the myth, which was propagated by Zionists, that Palestine is a land without people, and we are people without a land. And the myth that Palestine is a land without people is, as you can see now, is a myth. But what's surprising to me, as I have in London studied, looked at, you could see my Atlas of Palestine, 1871 to 1877. You can see, I was amazed. How could Britain and France think that Palestine is a land without people? And when they adopted Balfour Declaration, how could they do that? How could they actually accept this obviously outrageous myth? But it dawned to me that the reason is clear, that they wanted to make it so. They wanted, actually, the Western power wanted to, they actually condoned and adopted the ethnic cleansing of Palestine by making Palestine a land without people. That is their plan, but they call it that Palestine is a land without people. How could they say that? Let me tell you, if you go to Versailles Conference, Peace Conference in 1919, you will see that the Zionist Commission submitted to the Western powers at the time a map of Palestine. I have a copy of it. This map says, doesn't show any towns and villages in Palestine, and say shepherd's place, pasture land, and to tell them that Palestine is empty, so that the Western power in Peace Conference in Versailles would adopt Balfour Declaration and allow Jews to go and immigrate in Palestine. But how could the Western powers accept this blatant lie, which tend to be a crime? How could they do that? I'll tell you two things. One of them, the French, for example, how could they adopt that? They actually came to Palestine in the middle of about 1856 to 1870, and they have a man called Gorin, who spent many years in Palestine, and he wrote 7 volumes about Palestine, listing their towns and villages and who they are and so on and so forth. The Germans in 1850, I have on my wall right here, a map by Van de Velde, who actually charted Palestine in 1850, full of towns and villages. And now we come to the British. The British spent 4 years in Palestine, 1871, produced 12 volumes about Palestine, 26 maps, and showing 13,000 names. And my atlas is called Palestine, of Palestine, 1871 to 1877, is actually correcting these documents because they had errors. I completed them. I agreed with Palestine Exploration Fund to give me the original document. They were sent from Palestine to London 150 years ago, and I made the new atlas, which is available in London. Now, let me go back. How could the Western powers claim that Palestine is a land without people when their officers, their surveyors, their scouts, their spies have actually produced all these documents about Palestine? The reason is obvious. They colluded with the Zionists to actually create Israel in the ruins of Palestine. So now we go one step further and say, with this last, we know from history that no injustice can last. Shelf life of injustice is always short. I know very clearly this will cost bloodshed, and it did cost indescribable suffering to people for 73 years, actually more than that, from Balfour, 100 years. Palestinians are subject to wars waged against them for 100 years, longer than any people in the world. Constant wars. I don't mean intermittent problems. I mean wars for 100 years. And they are still fighting. When I was in Gaza, I found people defending themselves. And everywhere there has been in May 2021, not only the attack in Gaza, but the uprising in Jerusalem against eviction of people from their homes in Jerusalem. We even saw uprising or signs of uprising in the cities occupied by Israel in 1948, when they call them Israelis now, but they actually revolted against that. Now, let me come back to the situation today. The equation is very clear. Western powers, namely United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and others, I'll tell you why others, are still holding the support, unquestionable support, political, monetary, financial, armament, and so on, to support Israel in the destruction of Palestine and making it a land without people. They still do that. But there are hopeful signs. First of all, the Resolution 194, calling for the return of the refugees, is, as I said, still valid. I made studies on that, saying, is it feasible? Because my European friends say, yes, it was very tragic and so on, but now the place is full of Jews, and what can you do, and so on. I find this argument both immoral and racist. If somebody kills your family and keep killing your family day after day, taking over more and more of your land, and you would say, well, what can we do? He's still doing that. Does it mean that the repetition of the murder and acknowledgement and acceptance of the murder? If someone, serial killer, kills people, do you accept him because that's a fact, or what? We don't do that. The world doesn't work that way. Certainly the victims do not accept it. But even if we, like as a planner myself, let us say, how can we actually apply the right of return? We made a study of every single village land whose population are refugees, and we found out who lived in this land now, what kind of Jews, where they come from, what they do, and so on. And we found startling results, never disputed by any Israeli today. If anyone contradicts that statement, write to me. We found that 87% of Jews live only in 12% of Palestine. And most of the village lands of the rural refugees are still empty, so they can return. And then we actually have database on computers. We identify each village land, who owns that village land, where are they today, in refugee camps, and we can identify them name by name, and we can actually plot the route they can follow to return home. They don't need ships or planes. They only take a bus. Some of them, like in Gaza, they don't need a bus. They only need to walk across the barbed wire where the snipers killed many of them. They cross that barbed wire and just walk home. They are within walking distance. And then when they return in application of the international law, they will find their homes are destroyed. Israel destroyed 500 villages, and they planted trees over them. And the Jewish National Fund created parks to hide the debris, and they named these parks by the names of Western leaders who assisted Zionism, like Balfour, Britannia Park, and so on, to hide the ruins of destroyed villages. But when the refugees return to their villages, they find them destroyed. So we started a new plan among young Palestinian architects. Every year, Palestinian architects in the graduation year, they enter into a competition to reconstruct these Palestinian villages out of a list. We give them data and they do this. The results are judged by British architectural jury in London every year in September, and they produce wonderful results according to the British jury. So we have the right to return, we have the plan to return, and we have the intention, not the intention, the determination to return. Now, could this happen in the light of Western colonial powers still supporting Israel? I think the answer is yes. Why is that? The Western colonial powers as a government are still definitely against that. But the people in the world are opening their eyes to see the tragedy and the injustice in Palestine. Here, you are sitting here as students studying that. You are one example. Let me give you another example. I speak at universities in Harvard and Boston and various parts of California and so on. And when I give a lecture there, at least 1/3 of the audience are young American Jews. And they come to me and say, we have been cheated. We have been told there is no people in Palestine. Jews returned to their ancient land. There was nobody there. It's very noble project. And now we found that they kill and they commit so many crimes against people, expel them. Even today, they apply apartheid against them, even against the Palestinians who are Israeli citizens. They have 55 laws against them, discrimination against them. As you know, apartheid is a crime against humanity. And this is one of the many crimes against humanity which are committed. So I see that the young people I see, not only that, even in Australia, New Zealand, where I was a year ago, they actually, they opened their eyes to the truth, which was denied them by the Zionist pressure. You know, some cases of British professors who dare to speak the truth, they are fired because they are accused of being anti-Semitism. I ask a simple question. Who is afraid of the truth? Who is afraid of the truth? Only the criminal is afraid of the truth. If you are not a criminal, you have no reason to fear anyone telling the facts. So we have this trend in the world that young people are seeing the facts for themselves, and they are revolting against their elders if they are Zionists or Jews, for example. But this is not enough. I can also give you the example of the resistance of young people in Palestine itself. As you know, every day someone is killed, almost the blood of Palestinians is spilled every day by shooting a schoolboy going to school, or a woman going to give birth in a hospital, and demolishing of homes. This is real Nakba going on. Nakba never stopped. So I would say there will be a time when all this has to come to an end. The Palestinians now are 14 million. They will be 18 million in 2030, and half of them are in the soil of Palestine under Israeli occupation, rules, apartheid, discrimination, all kinds of things. As you will know, the treaty-based committees are condemning Israel, not now, almost 10, 20 years ago. Check that, treaty-based conventions on the abolition of racism and the apartheid and so on. So the whole world is against the actions and the actions of Israel. It's supported by few Western powers, not only by every possible means. I count 11 kinds of wars waged against us, not only military war. Erasing history is one, erasing geography is another. Forging archaeology to claim that this is not Palestinian. Imagine the irony, the funny irony, the tragic irony that a Polish and a Russian man coming from the icy hills of Siberia, coming to Palestine, claiming to be the original Palestinian who was there 2,000 years ago. And I and my family who have never left Palestine are not Palestinians. Probably we are secretly Polish or Russian, and they are the true Palestinians. This irony is unimaginable. You can actually distort truth and enforce injustice for so long. I tell my friend Ilan Pape this example. The pyramids in Egypt stayed 5,000 years ago. Why stayed that? Because the apex is in top and the base at the bottom. If you invert the pyramid, you make the apex down and the base at the top, you can do that. It's a unnatural situation, but you can do that. How can you do that? By having two strong hands holding the pyramids in this unnatural situation so that the pyramid will stand on its apex. But this needs very strong arms. If your arms are weak one day, it will fall. And that's why the pyramids remained a constant, or stayed all this time, because it is based on its base. And this base has one word, has one meaning: justice. Only if there is justice, the pyramid can stay on its base. So the future will never be stable unless justice is the base of the situation. And I leave for now this for you to ask some questions if you have any. Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't hear you. I don't hear you.
Can you hear us now?
Yes. Now
right.
I hear you. Yes.
So we are, this is kind of opening up the questions from the audience. So
the question that the pre-written one that I sent to the chat.
Feel free to, I don't have it, but you can.
There is a question that was mentioned.
So go ahead, yeah.
Firstly, thank you very much for the enlightening and very important talk and discussion and history of kind of some of the injustices Palestinians have experienced. It was very useful, so thank you very much. There was a question that was posed about, recently human rights organizations have started describing Israel as an apartheid state. But it's almost perhaps it might be inferred by some to be something that's new. You know, only recently have people begun to discover that Israel recently, because of the surge in right-wing politics, has become an apartheid regime. But is this an accurate description, or has Israel, for instance, always been, necessarily by its nature and by its practice, an apartheid state? It would be interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
History, law has a different meaning with time. We learn more things with time. When we see a certain event in history, we describe it differently according to our concept. Now, during 73 years, Israel has been criticized by the United Nations repeatedly, attacking villages, for example, in Qibya, attacking a bridge camp in 1953 and killing people in their beds in refugee camps in Qibya, destroying a whole village, and so on. So therefore, this was called aggression or war crimes or things like that. The word apartheid was first, probably, I'm not just guessing. I can go back to my notes. The discrimination treaty against discrimination was passed long time ago. Let me just remind you of certain facts. The United Nations, when they passed the partition plan, there were 55 members, mostly European countries. But in 1969, they were over 150. Now they are 193. This increase in numbers came from many countries in Asia and Africa and even Latin America who have been made free from colonialism, and they became members of the United Nations. So the United Nations then started to pass resolutions and in fact conventions condemning all kinds of the evils of colonialism, like, for example, discrimination, later apartheid, war crimes, aggression, and also in that period, 1969 and after, they passed resolutions calling on member states to assist Palestinians to be for their liberation and freedom by any means possible, Now, so after the fall of South Africa apartheid, it became a stronger convention, an applicable convention. It looked at the same crime before, but formulated in a new law. So as the law develops, look at the old crimes and formulate it in a certain and stronger way than before. ICC is the latest example that you can actually, under universal jurisdiction, can actually bring war criminals in any country to the court by any other country. There is a very sad example I have been watching last week. A Palestinian young man called Ismail Ziada, he is now, or then recently, a Dutch citizen. And in 2014, his family who lived in Gaza have been decimated, destroyed completely, his mother, father, sisters, and brothers, by Israel, bombardment. So as a Dutch citizen, he used universal jurisdiction to sue General Gantz, the chief of staff, the war criminal, at Dutch court. After 2-3 years of trying, the Dutch court yesterday or last week acquitted General Gantz because it said that he has state immunity. State immunity. Now, in ICC, there is no immunity for anybody because of his official position. And this same very court and this same very judges, these same very judges, under the same similar situation in Libya, forced Libya to pay $15 million compensation for a crime committed under the same rules. So here you have, the law is there, but it's only applied by the strong against the weak. What I'm asking you as young people, when you write about all this, you must really, in your career afterwards, convert your conventions and your principles into a political force. Because other than that, without that, they will be just nice wishes. How do you do that? You enter into politics. You get yourself elected as MPs. MPs formulate laws. Hopefully, in a democratic country, these laws will be applied later on. So the biggest problem today of young people when they are fighting for principle of justice, like your group, for example, there is a gap between their wishes and their rights and their logic and their very good legal arguments and the application of the law by the politicians. Why? Because there is no link, there is no bridge between these ideas and the government. They can be done through being members of parliament and then formulating laws, and then the majority party elects a government and they apply the laws. Unfortunately, as the Dutch court said to Ismail Ziada when they dismissed his case, politics play in the pursuit of law. Politics play. They are afraid of the Zionist pressure on them. As he called it, Ismail Ziada, sacred cow, Israel. They cannot do that. They force Libya to pay $15 million compensation for a similar crime or another crime, and they cannot do that. So this is where young people should come in. Convert the ideas, convert the rules of justice, convert the articles of law into an article of action, which in the end leads the governments to take action. If there is no democracy in the country, there is another solution. There is a revolution and a coup d'etat. People take the order by force and topple the government in case there is no democracy. So this force of justice is built up inside, and then one day it explodes. In democracy, it goes that route slowly, but in non-democratic country, it explodes one day. So let us hope that justice will come without too much bloodshed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anybody else have another question? You have, so go ahead, yeah. Do you want to talk to him there? Yeah.
Hello. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for the talk. You know, I've heard this story over and over about our history, but you've managed to put new perspectives for me personally. I'm sure my classmates feel the same way. My question is in regards to your comment about how there's not 1 kilometer that was not taken by brute force. And while I don't want to challenge this statement, I do want to ask you how you would respond to someone who would say that some Arabs sold their land willingly. Isn't that in one way, you know, a counter to what you said?
Thank you. Thank you.
But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, right. Okay. Let me answer this in some detail. I hope you bear with me. For me, it's late, so I hope I can answer you quickly. During the British Mandate, Herbert Samuel was the first High Commissioner in Palestine. His job was to bring freedom and free government to Palestine. But he has another agenda. He's a Jew, he's a Zionist. And so in the 5 years of his tenure, from 1920 to 1955, he instituted 100 laws. Many of them were illegal, even by London standards. And during that time, he changed the land laws so that he would allow the settlers to buy land or to control land. Now, what does it mean? It means that if a land is considered to be common, like pasture land or common land and so on, the government will take it over and give it to settlers. They gave concessions like that. And they changed the laws so that it's very difficult for a Palestinian to maintain a law, to maintain a land by virtue of his family for generations lived on it. Maybe he doesn't have a paper to do that, but everybody knows that, and the previous governments accepted that. So through these tricks, the Jewish settlers bought under the British 6% of the land of Palestine, 6%. And in terms of actual numbers, they are 1,491,000 dunams. Dunam is 1,000 square meters. Now, who actually sold this 6%? Mostly Lebanese and Syrians who were in Palestine and who lived there a long time ago, because all one country. You can have Italians buying a land in London, and then they were persuaded by Jews. They gave them 10 times the price of the land, and they said, now this is a new country, why should you go to Palestine? So they sold part of this land. Therefore, out of 6%, 5% were sold by somebody who is not Palestinian. There are cases in which Palestinians were subject to heavy taxes by the British, and they were forced to sell. And so they sold. Now, 6% is not a big amount, and the Palestinian farmers probably sold 1% of that. And so this is not an excuse to take over the country. Let me give you a simple example. How much property in central London is owned by non-British? Arabs from the Gulf buy that. Russians buy that. The Italians and the Greeks in Cairo in 1940 probably owned half of the central business district. If you own large parts of a country, or even a small island in a country or whatever, does it give you the right to kill the other people around you and take it over? No, no. But let me also add one thing. I don't think this percentage was the reason or the excuse for Israel to take over. As I have explained, and I can document it completely in complete detail, Palestine was subject to an invasion. 120,000 soldiers in 9 brigades in 31 military operations, committing 156 massacres and atrocities. This is what is reason for a Nakba. Their presence in kibbutz were there. How many are they? So many, few, 200. In each one, there are 30 people. This is not a reason to take over the country, except they were staging points for the eventual conquest of Palestine. I call this invasion is a deliberate plan, an action plan, and I don't think any amount of property obtained by Jews, whether correctly or maliciously, is a reason or an excuse to kill the people in the rest of the country and take it over.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Can I ask if there is one last question? It's a long day for me.
Yes, I don't know if there are, but we are kind of out of time. So do you have a quick?
We've got time for one more question.
One more question? Are you okay with one more question?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So come ahead.
Hey there. My name is Amin, and I'm born and raised Palestinian from Tamra, northern Palestine. And one factor that you have kind of advocated on is the fact that this movement is getting a lot of support from activism. And that is obviously a very good supportive factor that can lead to the return of people. But what do you think of the biggest impediment in the fiction, that Israel is simply unwilling to give land for obviously a lot of reasons? A lot of it is that if they come in, because I spoke about 14 million people, and that will mean that population of, let's say, Israel is going to be the vast majority are Arabs, which mean like politically they lose basically all the leverage. So yeah, there is like a lot of this growing movement and activism towards supporting the Palestinian cause and return and so on. But what do you think of the biggest impediment and basically the elephant in the room, that Israel is just not willing to give the people their land back? Thank you.
You have stated your case a bit quickly for me, but I'll try to remember it. You are from Tamra. There are two Tamras in Palestine. Which one are you? The Galilean one?
North.
Yeah?
In the north.
In the north. I see. Yes, we have 55,000 names in Palestine. And, so you are from the north. Okay. Well, look, in my study about the feasibility of return, I have explained that refugees can return, Palestinian refugees can return their homes without a major displacement of the existing Jews there, because they are still concentrated in small areas. So that assumes many things. That assumes people can live peacefully under rule of democracy. And therefore, there is no way this plan or any plan can be effected in Palestine if Zionism is still in existence or applied. Zionism for any future peace must be abolished, lock, stock, and barrel. There is no question about that, because it's really very logical, very clear. You cannot live people who deny you existed. They are going to kill you, or going to take your land, or going to cause you so many problems, because they think you are not human, you are not to be there, you are not Palestinian. They are the original Palestinians who came from Russia. And this is the situation in all history, that fascism, Nazism, all totalitarian regimes died. You check the history from 1938 till now, not one of these lasted. Of course, the last one is South Africa, the apartheid in South Africa. So the answer to your question, we welcome anybody to live in Palestine under rule of law and democracy. I keep telling people when I am in London, why don't Jews in Palestine live like Jews in Golders Green? They don't kill the British people around them. They don't take their land. They live like normal citizens. And they have, in certain areas, they respect Sabbath, and they can, practice their practices. But no Jew in Golders Green say, I am the boss, and I have the right, and I'm going to kill you if you stay in your home. I'm going to take it over. So there is no solution. I am certain of that. When people say about, this, that, and that, and that, there is no solution with people who deny that you exist, and they think that you must be destroyed in order to live. To be destroyed in order to live is not a formula for peace anywhere. If Jews live in Palestine, like they live in any country, under the rule of law. There is no apartheid, there is no Zionism, there is no, Zionism means all of these things. Then peace is possible. So it's our duty, all of us, to try to abolish Zionism. And when people in some universities say that, which is very logical and very lawful, they are subject to anti-Semitism. And I understand, I don't understand. Does anti-Semitism mean you condone killing people, taking their homes? That's a question for everyone to think about. So you can go to Tamra, and your relatives who now live in refugee camps in Lebanon and Jordan, they can go back to Tamra and live with you, who happen to be lucky ones to stay in the small portion of people who were allowed to stay in Palestine. Then the answer is very clear. No Zionism, democracy for all.
Thank you so much. Sorry, thank you so much for your time. We're gonna let you go because we know it's really late for you. So, but thank you. I think it was a really, I can speak for everybody. It was a really insightful talk, and yeah, I think. And you give one more thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Power to you, power to you. You have 60, 70 years to live, and we leave the world in your hands. So make it a peaceful place. Thank you. And send me the link, please.
We will, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.
Write to me if you have other questions later on.
Yes, so if anybody has any other questions for him, you guys can send it to one of us and we will happily email them forward. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. How do we do that? Stop recording. Yes. Yes.